so much to the entire organizing committee for the invitation. It's always a pleasure and an honor to speak at Diabetes India. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I hope you all can see my screen. Right, so today, like Sir said, I am someone who actually lives with type 1 diabetes. I've been a type 1 diabetic for over 13 years now. And I'm going to speak about what I truly believe is the future of type 1 diabetes, which is the APS closed loop system, the artificial pancreas system. And I will be speaking about my experience with the one that I am currently using. So life with type 1 diabetes, I always say it's not that easy. You have to take 6 to 7 insulin shots a day. There's constant monitoring, carb counting, correction doses, hypos and hypos, finger sticks. And it gets a little bit difficult. There's that what we call the burden of type 1 diabetes, which is actually very prevalent in all our lives as people who live with it. So then that entire burden was made slightly easier with the introduction of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitors. And in my case, the insulin pump that I began using was the Omnipod patch pump, and the CGM that I began using was the Dexcom G6. So of course, the entire burden of diabetes was definitely made easier with the introduction of insulin pumps and CGMs. So there was real-time sugar values that was constantly being seen, and there was constant insulin delivery. But I still had fluctuating sugars. And why this was because there was no intelligent real-time insulin adjustment. My pump was constantly delivering insulin, different basal rates throughout the day. My continuous glucose monitor was constantly telling me my sugar values. But why it was fluctuating? Because there was no intelligent changing of the insulin depending on the readings from the CGM. Enter DIY loop, the APS, which is the artificial pancreas system. And this is truly something that has changed the way I think about diabetes management. So my journey with the Omnipod APS and loop with Riley Link is what I'm going to be talking about today, and talking about the clinical experience of it impacting my life in a very, very positive way. So the components for any sort of a DIY loop system is you need a pump, you need a CGM, and you need a radio communicative device. So in my case, the insulin pump was the Omnipod, my CGM was the Dexcom G6, and my device was a Riley Link, which looks like this. So this is my third-party communicative device that basically talks between the pump and the CGM. So what the Riley Link and what any kind of a DIY APS system does, it essentially hacks into your pump. It hacks into your CGM and it makes it talk to each other. So this is what my DIY system looks like. As you can see, there's the Dexcom, there's an Omnipod, there's a Riley Link, and then your entire application is on your phone actually. So this is the Loop app which comes onto the phone, and it is through this app which you control your pump and your CGM as well. So the process, how do you do it? Since it's not FDA approved yet, and it's very true to its name DIY, which stands for do it yourself. So you need to actually build the app. So you need to code the app in an Xcode and things like that. I am not a tech wizard, but if I could manage it, I'm pretty sure anyone can manage it. You do require slight kind of techiness, but it's the documentation of it is so well done on GitHub and things. Most of the times it's just like a copy paste. And you build the entire app and then you transfer it onto your phone. The app shows up on your phone, and then you need to configure in the settings. These are the settings that you add into your phone for your pump. That is your insulin sensitivity factor, which you calculate, your carb to insulin ratio, so your ICR, your suspend threshold, which means under what sugar level do you want the pump to suspend the basal. So I've kept it at 90, and this suspend threshold is a predicted suspend threshold. It is not when your sugar actually comes below that. It is when the CGM with the algorithm predicts that your sugar will go below your suspend threshold, that it will actually suspend the basal. Override settings, which means like, for example, when you're working out or when you're on a flight or things like that, how much insulin would you want? It's like a temporary basal basically. And target range, which is totally customizable. So these are the settings that you sort of input into the phone, into your application. And then once you configure it, the magic begins. Like I always say, the basal rate automatically adjusts every time it loops. This is probably the most magical thing that happens in the type 1 diabetes life, wherein every single time it loops, which means every time it connects all three devices, which is around every 5 minutes, it looks and it corrects your basal. All right. So for example, on the left over here, you see this is my entire insulin delivery history. And as you can see, right, this was my normal insulin basal at this time is supposed to be 1.75. But every time you can see that it's changed. So it's made it higher over here, 2.05, 2.4, 2.35, 3, 2.65, 2.5. It's come down to 1.8, come down to 1.75, 0, which means it's suspended, again increase. So depending on your sugars and depending on the predicted values, the basal adjusts constantly to fight to keep your sugars in range. So this is a sort of graph of what, this is a screenshot taken from my application. This line over here, as you can see, is the basal modification. This is when I was sleeping. So life slightly increase, suspended, increase, suspended, increase, suspended. This spike of insulin that you see over here is because you still have to manually bolus for your meals. So I took a bolus amount of whatever 7 units over here for my meal. This is how the app looks. This is the UI, the interface of the application. So over here, you see the dotted lines are the values it takes from the CGM and the dashed lines are the predictions. And based on these predictions, it starts correcting. So as you can see over here, a bit of my dashboard, the green loop means everything is connected, everything is awesome. The 128 that you see over here is taken from my CGM. The plus 00 means the basal rate has not changed. It is 00, which means it's the normal basal rate that you have set. This is my pump icon. This is my health of my pod, but this is how the entire interface looks. It also tells you active insulin, or what we call IOB, insulin on board. So you know how much insulin is currently in your system. The impact of DIY looping, right? Minimal hypos. I used to be someone who used to suffer from a lot of hypos, at least 7 to 8 hypos a day because of my erratic schedule. With the DIY loop, that has drastically come down. Decrease severity of hypos. So even if I get hypos, the suspension work has already begun. So it doesn't go below maybe a 60, when earlier I used to go as low as 30s. So because of the decreased severity of hypo, my hypo awareness has also been regained. And of course, a greater time in range, which we all know is the new indication of good glycemic control. Quality of life, like I said, better sleep, so no nocturnal hypos, less anxiety, less hypoanxiety, less fluctuation, has reduced the burden of diabetes. Like I keep talking about, it makes decisions for you. It's like your actual pancreas, which is working, you know. And the biggest thing, which I mention in every time I talk about DIY, is that the APS keeps up with my timetable and not the other way around. Earlier, even with the pump, I knew that my pump would change the basal from 6 in the morning, it would make it to 1.75. And I knew I used to wake up every day at 6 in the morning. Let's say there was a day that I wanted to sleep in. I would have gotten a hypo if I had stayed in and not gotten up to eat because my basal was increased. With the APS, it adjusts according to you instead of you adjusting according to diabetes, which is a great, great relief. Clinical impact, I got my A1C down from 7.9% to 5.7% within 10 months of looping. I was surprised. I thought it was somebody else's report they gave me, but it was actually 5.7 with very, very minimal hypos. Time in range from 67% went up to 93%. It's from my Clarity app, and hypo awareness regained, which was also fabulous. I'm going to show you now some screenshots of my graph before and after looping. So this is a small indication of how my life used to be pre-looping. Of course, it wasn't like this all the time, but yes, these were the spikes and the drops in terms of fluctuation. This is how my graphs used to be on a day-to-day basis. It was a bit of time in range, but then there were drops and peaks and drops and peaks. And now I will show you the graphs post-looping. And these have been taken on random days. As you can see, it's almost 100% time in range. And this is the effect of looping. The next screenshot I'm going to show you is the day I began looping, and I very consciously took this screenshot because this is what my sugars were like. The moment I began looping, the magic started, and you can instantly see a difference. It doesn't even take that long. There's an instant reaction. So the pros, if I had to conclude and sum up, the pros of looping, of course, it's a technological marvel. We haven't seen something like this in type 1 diabetes care. Bolus from phone and watch. So this is my Apple Watch, which also has the option. So you don't require your third-party PDM if I'm using a pump of like an Omnipod. It minimizes the amount of things you need to carry. Basal modifications, you can change basals up to like every hour. You can have a new basal rate. Time and range, huge perk. Override settings. So when I'm working out, when I'm dancing, when I'm on a long flight, I literally have a flight override settings, which decreases my basal rate for 16 hours. I have a dance override setting, so I don't go into hypo at those times. It adapts rapidly because it's not FDA approved, right? So since it's not FDA approved and since it's a patient movement, there's constant update. So the same way you would update your iPhone, you will update your loop as well. It's by the patients, which I feel is the most important part, because I keep saying that you need to work with the user and not for the user. And here the user is making something because the user knows the challenges we faced. So since it's by the patients, it's got that user-centric design. And of course, there's an open loop option. So in case you just begin looping and you're a little unsure of how it's going to be, there's an open loop option, which means that it'll, before it makes the decision, it'll ask you whether, listen, I'm going to make this decision. Shall I go ahead with it? And then you can decide to say yes and no. I trusted it blindly and went with closed loop directly, but there are a lot of my friends who have used the open loop option as well. The data is very conclusive. This was a study by Dana Lewis, and mean blood glucose and time in range improved in every time category that they have sort of done the study for. A1C dropped from 6.4 to 6.1. Time in range increased from 75% to 82%. And this data sort of reflected into me as well when my data also proved this. The cons, yes, there are a few cons of DIY looping. It is DIY, which means build your own app. You can't just buy an app from an app store yet. It's not FDA approved yet. So if that's a concern for certain people, I completely understand. It's not a cure. It's not that once you put it on, you can just chill and relax. Of course, there is that maintenance of diabetes you need to continue. Tech trouble at times. And since it's a DIY, there's no helpline. You can't call up and say, like, listen, something went wrong. You need to do it all by yourself. Compatibility and options. So this is the DIY loop that I'm using with the Omnipod and the Dexcom G6. There is other options which you can use with older Medtronic pumps. There's also Open APS and Android APS. If you don't have an iPhone, that can also be used. A lot of people ask me, what are the difference between DIY loop and Medtronic 670G? There's more customization with DIY loop. There's different target ranges, not just 120 mgdl, which is what the standard is at the 670. Pump control by phone, which is also different. The loop makes...
We'll speed up a bit.
Yes, the loop makes predictive and proactive decisions, unlike the Medtronic, which basically gets it to suspend once it drops. And there's, of course, cross-device compatibility. We've just done a paper on this with Dr. Jyoti Dev, Dr. Banshid, Professor Parthakar, and myself, which is available to read now. And the loop does not sleep so that people with diabetes can. So that was the We Are Not Waiting. That's all about DIY loop. I would be happy to take questions if there are. Thank you so much.